Christian parenting.
Hello and welcome to the Growing Connected podcast. My name is Amy Olrick and I'm here with my husband Jeffrey Olrick. Jeffrey is a child psychologist and we are parents and authors, and together we've written the book The 6 Needs of Every Child, Empowering Parents and Kids Through the Science of Connection.
In my work as a therapist, I see both the joy and the pain families experience in their journey together. We all feel stuck and disconnected at times.
This season, we're talking about the science we present in our book and discussing the exciting ways we see faith and science coming together to point families to health and connection. We want to help parents understand their kids' instincts to move away from them to learn and explore when things are going well and to draw close when things are hard. As an attachment researcher, Jeffrey has identified 6 things our kids need to do both of those things well, and we've turned those needs into a compass. In our last episode, we talked about the need for support. Today, we're going to talk about boundaries, the last explore side need. Jeffrey and I will introduce it together, then we invite author, lawyer, and civil rights activist Valarie Kaur into the conversation. We all want our children to go out into the world and discover and learn things, of course, but there are some things out there that are going to hurt them. And then there are also other people and other things in the world as well with their own needs. So we give our children healthy boundaries so that they can still explore, but explore safely. Jeffrey, can you talk a little bit more? What is boundaries? How would you define it?
So when children are moving out into the world and they're exploring their world, they don't have a very clear sense of how both their actions affect the world around them and others in that world. And they may not completely have an understanding of how others are affecting them. And so that space, that boundary between them and the world and them, that's something that we have to name for them and give them clarity around what actually is happening in that space where we're interacting with others and with the world.
In the book, we talk about 3 reasons why we pay attention to boundaries. Let's talk specifically about those 3 reasons.
Yeah, so the first one is that when we have a greater awareness of how both our actions affect others in the world and how the actions of others in the world affect us, it makes us more likely to be able to live peacefully in the world so that we can both thrive. Mm-hmm. That I can thrive and you can thrive. And the world, God's creation, can thrive with me in it.
Yeah.
If I don't pay attention to those effects and help my child develop a sense of context for his place in the world, then inevitably what happens is somebody suffers. Either you're going to suffer because the world is having an effect on you, or the world is going to suffer because you're affecting the world that you don't see or realize or value. So God has certainly called us to be peacemakers, to have shalom in the world. And that's probably the biggest and most important reason we have boundaries. A second piece of boundaries is that it sets our moral priorities. So the fact of the matter is that there are a million boundaries in the world, and we can't pay attention to every single boundary in the world at all times. It's too overwhelming. We would just get paralyzed trying to pay attention to it all. And as parents, we sort of, by our own conscience, say, this is an area of life that we think really deserves your attention. And that will be different from one family to the next, what we pay closest attention to. But when I do pay attention to it, I'm signaling to my child, to our boys, this is something that we think is important for you to pay attention to as you move through life. So those are 2 reasons.
And then I think the third big reason that we give our kids boundaries is because we want to teach them how to set healthy boundaries in their own lives for themselves. Explaining to kids why we set the boundaries that we do and why it matters to us is such a huge part of teaching them how to set boundaries for themselves in a healthy way as they grow. None of us want our child to be out there and being the one who's always being walked on or being taken advantage of. So we want to help them recognize a boundary for themselves so that if someone tries to infringe on that, they can sense that. They'll get that feeling. When we set boundaries in our families and their lives, when we do that with respect rather than lording over them, we show them what that feels like. Okay, yes, that is a limit that we're not going to cross. But that doesn't mean that you are a small person who matters nothing to me. And I think when we talk about boundaries, it's important to talk about the concept of power. We've really thought a lot, and we talk about in the book, about power. When were we setting boundaries that were a little bit arbitrary? It wasn't about their development. It was just because we were just exhausted. We were overusing our power and not taking the time to set boundaries with a moral priority.
Yeah, I think the thing, Amy, is that most parents probably have an intuitive sense that one of the important things they do, part of parenting, is setting boundaries, is saying this but not that, that is important for our children to develop, to understand limits on their behavior. But what I don't think most parents realize is as they do that, they are setting a groundwork for their children about how their children, will interact with the idea of boundaries in their own lives away from home. Mm-hmm. And this issue of like, what are we really trying to accomplish here when we set a boundary or name a boundary? The message that our children will take away from that experience will depend a lot on how we go about setting that boundary. And if we come in hard just because we have the power to do so, because we can set consequences, whether they're carrots or sticks, and just say, that's wrong, and here are the consequences for it. Really, what we're just doing is asserting our power over a situation. We're picking up our kid from the wrong side of a boundary and putting them back on what we think is the right side. There's a consequence to that. If that's the only message that comes across and saying, you crossed a line, get back over this other line, here are the consequences for it. Two things emerge from that, particularly if those are done harshly, and that is, boundaries are what get enforced on me when I don't have power. And that means if I do have power, I can enforce it on other people. So they go back to school and they're in some little situation and they've got some power in their kid group. They're going to do just what you did to them, which is, I'm going to punish you because you're not doing what I want you to do. This is the line I've decided for myself is the good, right line, and I have the power to enforce it. And so really boundaries at that point has become an issue of hierarchy, not about mutual thriving. Apostle Paul talks about the importance of honoring your mother and father, and that's the fifth of the big 10 commandments, right? This is important business. In fact, it's the first commandment that has to do with our relationships with one another, and it's the first law with a promise so that it will go well with you. So that's an important clue to us. This is about life going well for all of us, for our children specifically, but also for them in the world. But Paul adds to that instruction in his letter to the Colossians, and that is an instructions to parents not to exasperate or embitter their child. Him pointing that out to me is a strong clue that he is attentive to how we go about setting boundaries is at the core of the heart of that law, which is that we would all thrive. And that we can go about setting boundaries in ways that are harsh and punitive and just are an exercise of power. And that gives rise to bitterness and anger. And it doesn't have the effect on our children that the law is intended to have, which is that we would all thrive. The Amplified Bible has a lovely way of unpacking that verse. It's Colossians 3:21. And it says, parents, do not provoke or irritate or exasperate your children with demands that are trivial or unreasonable or humiliating or abusive, nor by favoritism or indifference. Treat them tenderly with loving kindness, so that they will not lose heart and become discouraged or unmotivated with their spirits broken.
When you said so that they will not lose heart, that really struck me, because we parents are trying so hard to do our best, and often if we're too harsh with our boundaries, our children lose heart. And many of us have a memory of losing heart in our homes, becoming discouraged, becoming unmotivated. When we talk about setting healthy boundaries, it's because we want to strengthen our kids. We want boundaries to be a way to open up the world to them, to say, yes, there are these places that we don't go, but there's so much else that is big and beautiful about this world. So let's look at that together. I'm not going to come down hard on you. I'm going to open this up so that when you go out to explore, you can do that safely and you can be in relationship with others well, and you can feel good about yourself, and you can know that if someone is treating you badly, turn away from that relationship and maybe head to a different relationship. In Psalm 16, the psalmist David sings praise to God, saying, Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. I pray that our kids will look back on their childhood and say, yes, mom and dad did set rules for us and they enacted consequences when we crossed over certain lines. But they didn't do that cruelly, and I can see and understand why they pointed us in the direction that they did. The path they marked out for us opened our lives up to so much more than it blocked out. I want to set my children's boundary lines in good places so that their walk will be secure. We've created the 6 Needs Compass to help parents guide their child's journey of growth. It incorporates the instincts of attachment and the 6 needs of every child into its design, and we hope it will be a life-giving tool for you and your family. The compass is included in our book, and it's also available for download at growingconnected.com. Now we're so honored to have author, lawyer, and civil rights activist Valarie Kaur joining us for a conversation about boundaries. Valarie is a dear friend and colleague to me, and Valarie's book, See No Stranger, is a memoir and instruction manual for teaching people how to love, see, and respect one another. Valarie, thank you for joining us.
Oh, Amy, I'm so happy to be here with you.
And it's just so wonderful to be able to have a conversation with you and to tap into your wisdom, Valarie. And so as we start, we're just curious what your reactions were to this need for boundaries in children.
Well, I found myself, as I was reading your book, The 6 Needs of Every Child, having the same experience with boundaries as I had for every other chapter. And that is like, you have taken this kind of intuition, this wisdom that we have inside of us, that sort of, we haven't given language to it, and then pulled it out and put it on the page. So when I'm at my best, I feel like, yes, I follow these guidelines that you've laid out for us about how and why we have boundaries for our children. I notice that when I am tired and when I am not at my best, I'm also recognizing the ways that you say, well, are you a pleader? When your child is begging you for ice cream at 10 o'clock at night and you're really tired, to just give in? Or are you a shut it downer? Do you just snap at them and just, you wield your power to shut it down? And I recognize myself in both of those moments. Whenever I am tired, it's like, oh, it takes effort to set boundaries and to keep boundaries in a loving way. And what I just so appreciated about the chapter and really about the entire compass, I use it, I feel like every day. My son is 6 now and my daughter is 2. I use it for both of them. It's that you're able to give us a tool to act on the wisdom that's already inside of us that just needs a little bit of like surfacing in those moments when we're feeling like we're struggling.
Yeah, you mentioned the word power there. And I think this need is a really important need because it challenges us as parents to come to terms with that power that we do have in a relationship and how we're going to use it. One of our hopes in the book is to paint a vision of that in our relationship with our children. That is for the communal good. Like, we don't use this power just in interpersonal so that I'm in charge and I can tell you what to do, but that you could grow, our children could grow in just a greater awareness, like the world gets bigger for them. And yet we know that when we do that boundary setting, most of the time our kids are not happy about it, right? And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about that whole issue of power in our relationship with our children and how we interact with that.
It took me some time to explore how I wanted to use that power. I wanted my children to feel free, to feel unencumbered. And so my tendency has been to say yes, even when I had said no or tried to lay a boundary beforehand. And over time, I began to understand that the giving in was actually unhealthy for them. I began to think about boundaries as, especially your book really helped me with this. My son, the way he sleeps at night, he doesn't sleep in one position. Like, he just flops around like a fish all throughout the night. And his feet are, in our face on one moment and then in my husband's chest in another. And he's just turning around all night long. And so we've had to put up these guardrails on either side of the bed so that he doesn't fall off. And I think about boundaries like those guardrails. We want them to feel free to move, to explore, to dream. And yet we are the only ones here to make sure that they don't fall off, that they don't hurt themselves or hurt others in the process. And setting that boundary or setting that container, when I think of it that way, it has become easier. So then what do you do when you've used your power and you've exercised it in this way that feels like thoughtful and safe? And then, he wants the ice cream at 10 o'clock. And if he doesn't get it, there's like an explosion of rage. We had a stretch of years where we had so many bad tantrums, just screaming and kicking. And, at one point we had to move the other child into another room to make sure he wouldn't accidentally throw something at her. I'm just really out of control rages when we did say no. So part of sometimes my hesitance in saying the no was not just because I didn't want to restrict him, but because I wanted to avoid the tantrum.
Yes.
And what you helped me with, Amy, is understanding that tantrum wasn't a point where anything was wrong. That was the opportunity for me to create a safe container for his feelings, and for him to help, explore his feelings at the boundary. And first we explored a lot of like, okay, safe containers for rage. All right, do you need to go in the closet and throw the pillows on the ground? All right, breathe through it, my love. Okay, now do you feel better? Like, where do you feel it in your body now? We would explore it together. So sometimes it was safe containers for rage. Other times it was like, wait a second, if I can catch his grief before it goes to rage, then I can keep him in the grief of it. So the no, anytime someone says no to you, you feel like, oh, someone is saying no to me. How dare they? And then I'm going to explode because I have nowhere to go. But we've had this practice now. If I can get him to say yes 3 times, then I know that I'm inviting him into a moment of grieving. So no, my love, you can't have the ice cream. What? But you really wanted the ice cream, didn't you? Yes. Strawberry ice cream is your favorite, isn't it? Yes. You were waiting all day to have this ice cream with me, weren't you? Yes. And then the tears come, and then he's grieving, and then I can catch him and wrap my arms around him and help him through that emotion. So whether it's grief or whether it's rage, I feel like in these moments, those boundary moments when it's just so much, I'm giving him some skills that I think he'll use for the rest of his life. They're certainly helping me when the universe says no to me to help me deal with my own grief, my own rage, not to suppress it, but let yourself feel it and let yourself cry, let yourself be held. And then we move through it together.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And I want to make sure our listeners hear what you just did there, which is to see your child's tantrum, rage, anger as a sign of grief. And I think a lot of parents miss that. They don't see beyond the anger and they take offense at the anger, right? Like, I can remember a time Josh had seen yogurt. He was probably 3 in the grocery store, and I wasn't going to get the yogurt for him. We had some at home. I didn't need to get more yogurt. And he lost the plot, screaming. And all I could do was just put him on my hip and walk out the door with him screaming all the way. And you just feel this like rage yourself.
Yeah.
But being able to access that wisdom and understanding, this is about grief. It is about death of the self. Our children are coming to grips with they can't have it their way at every point in the universe. And we need to help them with that, to enter into a compassionate stance about that. Sometimes I would tell people, oh yeah, your kid's going to the Wailing Wall. Let them go there. They need to spend time there as part of the process. Mm-hmm. It's a miserable part of the process for us often, but to be able to even just recognize that piece, I think could be so helpful for parents.
And I love what you just said about process, because I think that's what it comes back to. And Valarie, I was thinking about this when you were talking about sometimes I'm a pleader and sometimes I'm a shutter downer. And absolutely, that's what I think we all are. And to look at these moments in our kids' development and in our own development, honestly, as just part of this long journey of growth. I think that with all of the parenting materials and everything that give us tips and tricks for how to get through times, it's as if this is the one moment. Are you going to get it right or are you going to get it wrong? And if we could dramatically change that whole frame from what do I do right now? And if I get it wrong, then everything is blown, or, my kid's going to be messed up, or I'm going to feel like such a failure as a mom, to like, okay, yeah, last night at 10:30, I really could not withstand a tantrum and I didn't have it in me to get 3 yeses and I gave him the ice cream and
Right.
It's okay. It's so okay. It's so great to have these older kids now to be like, oh yeah, we had so many hard, terrible, honestly, moments. We have beautiful moments too, don't get me wrong. But if you are in it with them, then the long view of the journey can be so beautiful.
And this is something you taught me, Amy, with the story about your son having a meltdown in the foyer of someone's house and how you were so mortified by, like the spectacle of him. You grabbed him in the car. I think about that a lot because there are moments when we have to do this in public view. And before, I was so concerned about what other people were thinking of us. Jeffrey grabbing the son and walking out with him kicking and screaming. It's like, I think about everybody else in the grocery store and how what they would think of us. And you helped me into the realization that you're probably not going to see these people again.
Right.
These are not the long-term relationships in your life. The most important relationships that you are tending to are with your children over the course of decades. So what can you do now that is for the long view, the long term, even if it's hard? And that, my love, has helped me so much with letting the moment be messy and loud and difficult, knowing that this is also part of the literacy that we're teaching them and the relationship that will grow and grow and grow after.
Yeah, and I think you're pointing out another important aspect of where parents can get tripped up with boundaries is the fear aspect of it. Whether that's the fear of what other people will think with how I'm doing this or not doing this. For a lot of our listeners, that might be the fear of what God is going to think about them if their kid doesn't follow this rule and do it in the right way. And that's not helpful. That takes us off the path. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, Amy, about having that longer view. Like, this is a process. The setting the boundary, the death to self, the going to the wailing wall, the grieving, the pain, and the coming to terms that we live with others on this planet where we are interconnected to one another. And our children take years to get to that place where that all starts to make sense. But that process is really messy, and we can give into our tiredness, our fears, our own anger, and just being able to name and recognize those things, I think, helps us for that longer journey.
I love this image that you have in the chapter called Boundaries, that, anytime a family is struggling, they should just send like a flare up into the sky. So it's like, oh, okay, there are the Olricks. Oh, there go the Rajus. Oh, there are the Kaurs. It's like, oh, we're all, and especially, we're having this conversation during pandemic where we have never been more physically distant or isolated. And it can feel like when so many people are suffering that these daily struggles and these intimate dramas inside of our own home, wrestling with our own children, are minuscule compared to, and yet they are the stuff of life. The world in here is just as real as the world out there. It's like, this is where we are practicing beloved community, is right here and now in our homes. And so that image, sometimes I think of that when I'm struggling with, my 2-year-old now is now entering her tantrum phase. And so it's like, oh, the hitting is starting now and this, and I get so angry. And if I just saw another flare up, 2 houses down or another here, and that imagery is so helpful. And I think this is why this podcast and this community is so helpful. It's like, oh no, we're not alone. We're all struggling. We're all doing our best. And there's a way to do it with love.
I love that. And that actually came out of a very real conversation. We had just moved to New Zealand. I'm getting to know people. People seem wonderful and friendly, but also very together. And I felt very not together. And we were sitting around with these moms who had kind of taken me in, talking about things. And one of the women who just seemed, in my mind, like kind of the mom that I wanted to be. We all maybe can pinpoint the kind of mom that you think that you want to be. If you could, this is her. And she was talking about a tantrum that her kid had. And I thought, you too? I mean, I should know that. But still, when you see people who from the outside look as if everything is going well, to hear people actually say it is hard for me too is just a reminder of human frailty and the fact that raising kids is hard, and we all have these moments, and we really do need community. We really need to hear other people say this is tough. One thing that I'm thinking about as we're talking about that is these are things to be teaching our kids from an early age. We've talked a lot on some of the previous podcasts about talking to kids about their feelings, talking about their emotions, talking to them about the fact that we make mistakes all the time, talking to them about how we could change our minds. And I think there's an intersection with the work that you're doing right now, which is so important. So I want to underline that a little bit. Like right now, we're seeing some stark dividing lines and divisions between people. And I know that we as humans have tendencies to divide ourselves into groups, but this moment feels extreme, as if it's dividing into an us versus them moment. And so as a Christian, I read Jesus's instruction to love my neighbor as myself, and it points me in a different direction, to push past the boundary lines that I might be putting in front of myself as a result of my own fears and my preconceived notions, and to go out into the world and love people wholeheartedly. In that way, that instruction expands my boundaries and pushes me out of my comfort zone. It calls me to embrace. So your wisdom in that has been so important in teaching me how to do that. So you talked about teaching people how to see and love others and say that it begins with wonder and that wonder can be taught. How do we teach our kids to wonder about others? How do we take what's happening in our homes as this microcosm of what's happening in the wider world and grow them into people who can live at peace and wholeness with one another?
It's such a good question. All of my work on revolutionary love out there in the world rose from insights I gained from mothering. I realized after my son was born that I had to wonder about him every day to figure out what he needed. Even now at 6 and 2, they are changing so fast every day that I have to continue to wonder, okay, who are you now? What do you need now? What do you need today? What do you want today? How can I care for you today? And so that wondering actually precedes the other things that we usually associate with love. Like we tend to conflate love with empathy. But when my daughter is screaming, empathy might not be that useful to me. to sit and feel as she feels might not be what actually I need to do to take action. What I need to do is to figure out why is she crying, wonder about her needs, wonder about what might soothe her. So I find that wonder is the first act of loving another, and that other tools of love, compassion, feeling for another, or empathy, feeling as another, that those things can follow. But to wonder about another is to say, oh, you are as infinite and complex inside of you as I feel myself to be. And as long as I keep wondering about you, I'll gain information for what you need, how you need to be loved. I think we're called now to love our neighbor as they would have us love them, love them as they need to be loved. And that requires us to lead with wonder. So what I call revolutionary love, it's like, what if we take this kind of these insights that we have with our children for how to care for them out into the larger world? What happens when we start to wonder about people who do not look like us, who are outside of our immediate circle? What would we risk if the people who are in harm's way right now, if we saw them truly as sisters, brothers, our own children, our own parents, then what would we do? How would that change us? What would that lead us? So it's an invitation into imagining everyone around us as part of our own flesh and blood and letting that guide how we show up for each other.
One of our big hopes with the Compass is that we will get people to start to feel inside of themselves what it feels like to be connected with one another and to feel what it feels like to be disconnected with one another. And part of that for me has been recognizing, okay, when I feel like, oh, this is a boundary, or that's a scary place for me to go, start to wonder about that boundary. So something about loving someone else or entering into loving them the way they need to be loved feels scary to me, then that's a prompt. That feeling of disconnection inside of me is a prompt to get still and wonder about that thing. Like, what is it? Is it valid? Is there something there that I need to understand and embrace? Is it a result of conditioning and culture that are not serving me well to connect in my community? So I think that it's just that learning how to live wholeheartedly, and for me to be still and know, to say to God, help me understand this feeling inside of myself and help me pull me deeper than I would be able to go otherwise on my own.
That's so beautiful. And, you asked me, how can we teach our children to wonder? Oh, wonder is our birthright. They are already inside of it. All of the time, they There's so much about the world that they don't know around them that their orientation is to wonder about it. And for some of us, our wonder in our childhood was nurtured and we were able to feel it rise inside of us as a capacity. And for others, it was shut down too early. So how can we, but for all of us, wonder is innate, wonder is birthright. So what does it mean to encourage our children's wonder? These words have really helped me. Imagine looking up on the face of anyone or anything and saying, "You are a part of me I do not yet know." Mm-hmm. How would you orient to that thing or that person differently? What would you let into your heart? How would you let it change you? And when you say that's scary, it is scary, because to listen deeply to another is an act of surrender. You risk being changed by what you hear, by what you experience. But we're always changing. We're always changing. The question is, how are we allowing ourselves to be changed by the world around us? Can we do it leading with love and connection? So sometimes I feel like my children are my greatest teachers in wonder. When I have forgotten to, or when I feel too tired to, I just have to get really present and look at them and the way they see me and the way they see others. And that invites me back into the practice.
That word is such a beautiful word, wonders, and I think such an important word. And I think we use the word curious as a central concept, certainly from a child psychologist perspective, that we want to nurture curiosity and wonder, as you say. And I think your comments make me reflect on, so that natural wonder that we carry in us as human beings, how do we nurture that? And conversely, how do we choke that out of our children? And I think in this area of boundaries, we run the risk of choking wonder about others when we come in with our boundaries in a harsh manner. And I know that a lot of parents feel very convicted about boundaries. Like, that's not a hard thing for them in a sense. Like, boundaries is a key thing of parenting. Like, that's my job, is to tell you what's right and wrong and to enforce those boundaries. But when we come in a way that is hard and shaming, I think that's how we choke wonder out of our children, right? Because now the focus isn't on, oh, what did I not see that was there, and how you can help me to see things that I don't see about others and about the world, and how I affect others in the world. Instead, the focus is on, I'm a bad person because I crossed some line and I broke a rule, and you just don't want to have that feeling again. So you actually run away from the boundary because you don't want that feeling again. And process we've been talking about, you've been talking about with your beautiful ones, is to enter into that conversation about boundaries, not harshly, firmly. I think that's a part of that issue of our power. Like, we do have a power. We are going to look at this together, like something's going on here, but let's approach it with wonder, I think is a beautiful word to use. Like, oh, you are discovering things, and and a big part of my job is to help you discover what you don't yet see. And that's a wonderful gift as a parent to me, that I can play that role in my child's life. It's just that sometimes the process of that can be painful if my kid is like, well, I'm not really interested in that. I just want to do what I want to do right now.
Yeah, I think it's less about teaching them wonder by talking about it. I mean, I certainly do. When my daughter and I go for our dates on Friday mornings, we walk to the ocean and we pass all kinds of things. And so we've developed a little song. Ants on a leaf, birds in the sky, sweet little bee, tree so high. Wonder baby says, wow, whoa, you're a part of me I don't yet know. We do this with everything. We do this with the ocean and the shells and the people walking by. And then we turn to their own feelings, your own emotions, like everything around you, a part of you do not yet know. So there's a lot of teaching and languaging I do. But then I think, what really happens is when they see us model it. when we are practicing it, they do as we do. I remember a few months ago, I really needed to write something, and I needed a moment of quiet and children in the house. And so I thought I locked myself in my closet, and I was writing and writing and writing, and I needed to finish the statement that I was writing. And my son found me in the closet, and was like, interrupted me once. It's like, can I have paper? I'm like, oh, go. And like a few minutes later, open the door again. Can I have tape? Oh, go. Here, you can get it. And then finally, the third time, he's like, can I have the stapler? And I just snapped at him. I was just so angry. It was
as we do, yes.
Cut a downer, right? I hadn't talked to him about what I was working on or how much time I need. I hadn't mapped it out in the way that you are inviting us to do in the chapter. I hid in my little corner to try to do a thing, and was just, showing my teeth when he was interrupting me, he did not knowing what I was doing or what I needed. And so he goes away, and I'm like, oh gosh, I wonder if this is going to be tantrum time, or what will happen. And a few minutes later, I keep writing. I hear a swish under the door, and I look down, and it's a Valentine. And this happened in July. So here I am getting a Valentine shaped in the shape of a fish. And so I'm holding this Valentine. I look around. I find my son in the house. I'm like, what is this? He's like, Mommy, I made you a Valentine. It's like, why? It's like, well, I saw that Mommy wasn't being her best self. So I asked myself, what would Mommy want? What does Mommy need? So I made you a Valentine.
Oh, that's awesome.
I mean, and that is what we're talking about when we're talking about relationships. Our kids don't ever need to feel like they need to take care of us, but to be in relationship with them, to be able to have these moments of breaking and coming back together, and the little things that you start to see them paying attention. Oh, I remember when one of our kids who used to have terrible tantrums, he first started to clue into the fact that we have needs and emotions as well. And I remember, I think you'd hurt your leg or something, Jeffrey, and the next day said, how's your leg feeling, Dad? And you have these moments of like, wait a second, like they're seeing us too.
I'm a person to you now.
And so we just hold on to those things, and then they develop and grow. And over time, I mean, just think about the beautiful imaginings that we have for our families as they grow, to send our kids out into the world with security and health and resiliency, able to love the world that they're in, the people who they encounter, and then also to have strong relationships with their own families, and hopefully to stay in good relationship with us too. So there's no formula for that, but I do think that a balance of all of these things, learning how to set these boundaries without harshness, and then also just really embracing that sometimes we're going to have to repair. Sometimes there'll be terrible difficulty in our families. That's true for everybody. We'll send up a flare. We will just know that we're all in it together, and keep going.
That's right.
Oh, Amy, as I'm hearing you speak, it's like that's what we're doing, aren't we? We're teaching them how to love.
Mm-hmm.
We're teaching them how to love, how to wonder, how to continue to wonder when it's hard, how to manage their grief, how to manage their rage, how to repair after the rupture. And if we are teaching them how to love in our own intimate relationships here at home, then that means we're giving them the tools to be able to love out there. And I keep thinking, what if our homes, what if our schools were containers, were laboratories where we're teaching our children how to love without limit, like how to love others, how to love even their opponents, how to love themselves. So this stuff is frontlines work. I think of mothering parenting as frontlines work often, because this is precisely what we are doing every day with our babies.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Valarie. We've loved this conversation.
Oh, I've loved it too. And the children haven't barged through the door to interrupt me.
Amazing.
I can hear ours rustling in the background, but All right. Thanks, Valarie.
Thanks, Valarie. It was so wonderful.
If you enjoyed the conversations we shared today, please subscribe and share. And tune in for our next episode, when we'll be discussing kids' need for protection. For an in-depth look at the concepts we discussed today and stories about our family's journey, check out our book, The 6 Needs of Every Child: Empowering Parents and Kids Through the Science of Connection. You'll find illustrations of the compass there. We've heard from parents and teachers who want a copy of the compass to hang up, so we've also created a PDF that's available for download at growingconnected.com. And now may the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, find you and hold you today. May you be strengthened and encouraged in ways that surprise you, and may you and your family experience